Collapse doesn't happen suddenly. It follows a predictable 7-stage cycle. Each stage is visible. Each stage is measurable. And right now, multiple economies are cycling through these stages simultaneously. This isn't speculation. This is pattern recognition. Systems don't fail randomly. Failure follows mechanical patterns. The same patterns that destroyed Argentina in 2001 are visible in multiple countries today. The same patterns that destroyed Venezuela starting in 2014 are repeating elsewhere. The same patterns that destroyed Lebanon starting in 2019 are observable now. Patterns repeat across time and geography with mechanical precision, because collapse is mathematical, not random. When governments spend more than they earn, collapse becomes inevitable. When debt exceeds growth, collapse becomes mathematical. When currency printing accelerates beyond production, collapse becomes certain. These aren't ideological statements. They're observable patterns. The patterns are currently observable. Recognition enables positioning before collapse. Most people don't recognize patterns until too late. By the time they understand what's happening, options have closed. But the people who recognize patterns early can position accordingly. They can move resources. They can prepare alternatives. They can survive. To understand what's happening now, you need to understand the 7 stages. And more importantly, you need to know which stage we're currently in. Stage 1 looks like prosperity. Assets are appreciating. Wealth is expanding. Everyone feels rich. This is actually the setup for collapse. The mechanism of stage 1 is simple. Central banks begin printing currency. They frame this as stimulus, accommodation, monetary support. What it actually means is that more money is being created without corresponding increase in productive capacity. When more currency chases the same amount of assets, prices rise. Real estate prices inflate. Stock prices inflate. Bond prices inflate. The illusion is that the economy is growing and assets are becoming more valuable. The reality is that currency is becoming less valuable. Assets aren't becoming more valuable. Currency is becoming worth less. Everyone feels wealthy because their assets are worth more in nominal terms. A house that cost $100,000 5 years ago now costs $300,000. The owner feels wealthy, but they don't feel that the currency is worth a third of what it was. They feel that their house is worth more. This illusion creates the conditions for collapse. Government and central banks encourage borrowing during stage 1. They say it's safe to borrow because assets are appreciating. They say you can use asset appreciation as collateral for more borrowing. They say the growth is sustainable. Everyone believes in perpetual growth. Real estate investors buy multiple properties. Stock investors invest on margin. Governments borrow to fund stimulus. Corporations borrow to buy back stock. Consumer debt increases as people borrow against inflated home values. The entire system becomes dependent on continued asset inflation to service accumulated debt. Historical examples show this pattern precedes collapse repeatedly. In the United States in the 2000s, housing prices inflated. Central banks kept rates low. Everyone borrowed. Everyone believed housing would appreciate forever. Then housing prices peaked and began declining. The system couldn't service accumulated debt when asset values stopped appreciating. In Venezuela in the 2000s, oil wealth created false prosperity. Asset prices inflated. Everyone believed in perpetual growth based on oil revenue. Then oil prices collapsed. The economy couldn't function without continued oil revenue. In Argentina in the 1990s, the currency peg created false stability. Asset prices inflated. Everyone borrowed. Everyone believed the peg would hold forever. Then the peg broke. The currency devalued. Accumulated debt became unserviceable. In Lebanon in the 1990s and 2000s, banking expansion and asset inflation created false prosperity. Real estate prices tripled. Everyone borrowed. Everyone felt wealthy. Then the banking system became insolvent and the currency collapsed. Current indicators show stage 1 is advanced globally. Real estate prices are at historical highs in most developed countries. Stock markets are at record levels despite economic weakness. Government debt is increasing to fund asset purchases and stimulus. Central banks are maintaining historically low rates despite inflation. Asset inflation is continuing despite economic stress. The illusion of prosperity is being maintained through continued currency printing and asset price support. But the mechanism is identical to previous Stage 1 cycles. More currency is chasing the same assets. Prices are rising in nominal terms while currency is losing value in real terms. The system is being set up for Stage 2. Stage 1 creates the conditions for Stage 2. And Stage 2 is where the first cracks appear. Stage 2 looks like growth. People are borrowing. Business is expanding. Credit is flowing. This is actually the moment when debt becomes dangerous. The mechanism of Stage 2 is escalation. During Stage 1, asset prices inflate and everyone feels wealthy. During Stage 2, that feeling of wealth is leveraged into debt. Government borrows to fund operations and stimulus. Private corporations borrow to expand. Consumers borrow against inflated home values. Students borrow for education. Everyone borrows. The borrowed money is used to purchase the inflated assets from Stage 1. More people buy real estate because prices are rising and credit is available. More companies expand because access to capital is cheap. More consumers spend because they can borrow against home equity. Debt accelerates to unprecedented levels. The illusion is that the economy is growing. The reality is that the economy is borrowing its way forward. Economic growth is actually borrowed growth. Real growth would come from increased productivity or income. But productivity isn't increasing. Incomes aren't increasing fast enough. The growth is coming from borrowed money. This is unsustainable, but nobody acknowledges it during Stage 2 because the borrowed money is flowing and everyone feels prosperous. Debt service becomes a larger portion of income as borrowing accelerates. A person who borrowed at low rates 5 years ago can service that debt easily. But when new borrowing is required to service old borrowing, the system is becoming unsustainable. Debt-to-income ratios reach critical levels. Governments borrow more than they earn in revenue. Corporations carry debt loads that exceed their annual earnings. Consumers have mortgage payments and car payments and credit card debt that consume more than 50% of their income. The system is becoming dependent on continued borrowing to service existing debt. If borrowing stops, the entire structure collapses. Historical examples show this pattern precedes collapse repeatedly. In the United States between 2000 and 2007, debt doubled. Government debt increased as the government ran deficits. Corporate debt increased as companies borrowed cheaply. Consumer debt increased as people borrowed against inflated home values. By 2007, total debt in the system had doubled from 2000 levels. Then credit markets froze. Borrowing stopped. The system couldn't service accumulated debt without continued borrowing. Collapse followed. In Argentina during the 1990s, external debt accumulated as the government borrowed heavily. Private debt accumulated as businesses and consumers borrowed. By 2001, the accumulated debt was unsustainable. The currency peg broke. Collapse followed. In Venezuela during the 2000s, foreign debt accumulated during the oil boom. The borrowed money was used to fund spending. When oil prices declined, the government still serviced debt but couldn't fund spending. Collapse followed. Current indicators show Stage 2 is advanced globally. U.S. federal debt exceeds $36 trillion. Corporate debt is at record levels. Consumer debt is at record levels. Debt to GDP ratios globally are approaching 150%. Interest payments are consuming an increasing share of government budgets. Refinancing risk is increasing as interest rates adjust upward. Central banks are withdrawing stimulus while debt levels remain at historic highs. The system has become dependent on continued low interest rates and continued borrowing to service accumulated debt. If either condition changes, the system becomes unsustainable. Stage 2 creates unsustainable debt levels. Stage 3 is when the system reaches its limit. Stage 3 is when reality meets the math. Growth stops. Debt service consumes revenue. The system has reached its limit and can't grow beyond it. The mechanism of Stage 3 is mathematical inevitability. During Stages 1 and 2, the system functioned because growth was possible. Asset inflation continued. Borrowing increased. The borrowed money was used to purchase assets and fund spending. As long as growth continued, debt could be serviced from new borrowing and economic expansion. But at some point, growth reaches a limit. The economy can't grow faster. Productivity can't increase faster. Population can't expand faster. Technology adoption can't accelerate faster. Physical and demographic limits are reached. The economy reaches its maximum possible growth rate. When this happens, debt service becomes problematic. Interest payments become larger than revenue. The government can't raise taxes enough to cover interest payments. The government can't cut spending enough without economic collapse. Businesses can't earn enough to cover debt service costs. Consumers can't service debt from income. The system has reached its mathematical limit. It can't grow beyond this point. It can't service accumulated debt without growth. Business defaults begin accelerating. Companies that took on debt assuming continued growth discover they can't service that debt. Consumer defaults begin accelerating. People who took mortgages assuming continued income growth discover they can't make payments. Government revenues decline as businesses fail and unemployment rises. Government spending requirements increase as unemployment rises and welfare demands increase. The government faces a mathematical impossibility. It can't balance budgets because revenues are declining and spending requirements are increasing. The system reaches mathematical limit. Historical examples show this pattern repeats. In the United States in 2008, growth stopped when the housing market peaked. Housing prices couldn't rise further. Construction couldn't expand further. The economy couldn't grow faster. Debt service became impossible. Defaults accelerated. In Argentina in 2001, growth stopped when the currency peg could no longer be maintained. The government couldn't service debt in foreign currency. The peg broke. Collapse followed. In Venezuela in 2014, growth stopped when oil prices collapsed. Oil revenue, which had funded growth, disappeared. The government couldn't service debt. Collapse followed. In Greece in 2010, growth stopped when government borrowing reached unsustainable levels. The government couldn't borrow more. The math became undeniable. Collapse followed. Current indicators show Stage 3 is beginning globally. U.S. GDP growth is slowing despite stimulus. Interest payments are exceeding the defense budget. Government is unable to balance budgets even in nominal terms. Corporate earnings are declining despite inflated asset prices. Unemployment rate is disguising actual labor market weakness. Productivity growth is stalling. Demographic trends are working against growth. The economy is reaching its mathematical limit. Growth is stopping. Interest payments are consuming revenue. The system is becoming unsustainable. When a system reaches its mathematical limit, Stage 4 begins. And Stage 4 is where things accelerate. Stage 4 is when inflation becomes undeniable. Prices at stores triple. Your salary doesn't keep pace. The currency is being printed into worthlessness. The mechanism of Stage 4 is desperation. When a system reaches its mathematical limit in Stage 3, governments face an impossible choice. Default on debt and face economic catastrophe. Or inflate the currency and attempt to service debt with depreciated money. Governments almost always choose inflation. The central bank begins printing currency aggressively. They frame this as stimulus, quantitative easing, liquidity injection. What it actually means is that massive amounts of new currency are being created without corresponding increase in production or value. When more currency chases the same amount of goods, prices rise. Inflation accelerates beyond official statistics. The government says inflation is 3%. Your grocery bills have tripled. The government says inflation is 4%. Your rent has doubled. The government understates inflation because acknowledging true inflation would create panic. But the inflation is undeniable to anyone who buys groceries or pays rent. Purchasing power declines month by month. Your salary, which seemed adequate last year, is insufficient this year. Your savings, which you believed were secure, are declining in purchasing power daily. Savers are punished during stage 4. If you have savings in cash or bank deposits, the inflation destroys the value. Your savings lose purchasing power month by month. You're losing money mathematically by saving. Borrowers benefit during stage 4. If you have debt at fixed rates, inflation makes the debt easier to service. You're paying back debt with currency that's worth less than when you borrowed it. The debtor benefits from inflation. The saver is destroyed by inflation. Asset prices inflate further during stage 4. Real estate prices continue rising nominally even though the underlying economy is weakening. Stock prices continue rising even as corporate earnings decline. Bond prices adjust, but bonds become dangerous as inflation accelerates. The asset inflation masks the underlying collapse. People think their assets are becoming more valuable when actually the currency is becoming less valuable. Currency depreciates against foreign currencies during stage 4. The local currency loses value relative to the dollar or euro or other foreign currencies. This makes imports expensive. It makes foreign debt expensive to service. It creates capital flight as people attempt to convert local currency to foreign currency. Historical examples show this pattern repeats. In the United States in the 1970s, stagflation occurred. Inflation accelerated while growth stagnated. Prices tripled. Salaries didn't keep pace. Purchasing power declined. Savers were destroyed. In Argentina between 1998 and 2001, peso devaluation accelerated. The government printed currency aggressively. Prices rose. Purchasing power declined. By 2001, the currency had devalued 70%. In Venezuela between 2012 and 2016, Bolivar devaluation accelerated. The government printed currency to service debt. Prices rose exponentially. By 2016, inflation exceeded 800% annually. In Zimbabwe between 2006 and 2008, hyperinflation accelerated. The government printed currency to pay for spending. Prices rose exponentially. By November 2008, inflation reached 79 billion% monthly. In Lebanon between 2019 and 2022, pound devaluation accelerated. The central bank printed currency. Prices rose. The pound lost 90% of its value. Current indicators show stage 4 is advanced globally. Inflation globally is at 30-year highs. Central banks are printing record amounts of currency. Real interest rates are negative globally, meaning savers are losing purchasing power. Purchasing power is declining month by month for ordinary people. Asset prices are inflating despite economic weakness. Currency values are changing daily in some cases. Salary increases are lagging price increases. People's actual purchasing power is declining even though nominal wages are increasing. Stage 4 attempts to solve the debt problem through inflation, but it actually accelerates the collapse timeline. It destroys savings and pensions. It creates capital flight. It makes investments desperate and risky. It pushes people toward stage 5. Stage 4 creates desperation. Stage 5 is when people try to escape the collapsing currency. Stage 5 is when people who understand try to escape. Capital flees the country. Those with options move their wealth internationally. Those without options watch helplessly. The mechanism of stage 5 is survival instinct. During stage 4, inflation becomes undeniable and currency is depreciating visibly. The wealthy and informed understand what's happening. They understand that the currency is being destroyed. They understand that stage 6 is coming. They begin moving money internationally. They convert local currency to dollars or euros or other stable currencies. They open accounts in foreign banks. They purchase foreign real estate. They move capital to countries with stable currencies and rule of law. This is rational response to predictable currency collapse, the demand for foreign Currency increases dramatically during Stage 5. Everyone who has resources tries to convert to foreign currency. The black market exchange rate diverges from the official rate. Foreign currency becomes scarce and expensive. The local currency depreciates faster as demand for foreign currency increases. The government watches capital flee and becomes desperate. It responds by imposing capital controls. International transfers are restricted or prohibited. ATM withdrawal limits are imposed. Bank accounts are frozen. Citizens are prohibited from converting local currency to foreign currency legally. Dollar black markets emerge as people attempt to exchange currency illegally at real market rates. The government attempts to prevent capital flight but can't stop it completely. Money still flees through informal channels, cryptocurrency, smuggling, and illegal money transfers. Historical examples show this pattern repeats. In Argentina in 2001, capital flight occurred before and after the Corralito. Before the Corralito, wealthy Argentines moved money to Miami and Montevideo. After the Corralito, people attempted to smuggle cash out of the country. In Venezuela between 2014 and 2019, capital flight was massive. Wealthy Venezuelans moved to Miami, Bogota, and Panama. Middle-class Venezuelans attempted to flee with whatever resources they could carry. In Lebanon, from 2019 to present, capital flight has been substantial. Wealthy Lebanese moved to Dubai, London, and Paris. Middle-class Lebanese attempted to move money to foreign banks before capital controls were imposed. In Greece in 2015, capital flight occurred before capital controls were imposed. Greek depositors withdrew cash from banks and moved it to accounts in Germany and Switzerland. Once capital controls were imposed, this became impossible. Current indicators show Stage 5 is beginning in vulnerable economies. Wealthy individuals are moving assets to Switzerland, Singapore, Dubai. International wire transfers are increasing in vulnerable economies. Foreign currency demand is increasing in vulnerable economies as locals attempt to preserve wealth. Gold purchases are increasing globally as people attempt to hold value outside currency systems. Property purchases in stable countries are increasing as capital flees vulnerable countries. Citizenship applications to stable countries are increasing as wealthy attempt to establish legal residency elsewhere. Brain drain from vulnerable economies is accelerating as educated and wealthy people emigrate. Why this stage matters is that it removes productive capital from the economy. The people with resources and capability are leaving. This accelerates local currency depreciation as capital flees and demand for foreign currency increases. It creates shortage of foreign currency for essential imports. The government responds with capital controls. This freezes assets of those who didn't flee in time. It creates a two-tier system of those who escaped and those who are trapped. Stage 5 is when inequality becomes visible. Wealthy escape. Middle class is trapped. This creates anger and social instability. Governments respond with authoritarian measures to prevent capital flight and maintain order. When capital flight accelerates, governments respond. Stage 6 is when they begin seizing assets directly. Stage 6 is when governments stop pretending. They seize assets directly. Emergency taxes, pension raids, forced conversions. The legal theft of remaining wealth. The mechanism of Stage 6 is desperation. By Stage 6, capital has fled, currency is worthless, and the government has no revenue to function. It must maintain military, police, bureaucracy. It must prevent complete collapse. The only option is to seize remaining accessible assets. The government uses legal frameworks to do this. It introduces emergency property taxes that didn't exist previously. It raids pension systems and partially seizes them, converting them to government debt. It forces bank deposits into local currency at artificial exchange rates. It introduces wealth taxes on remaining assets. It retroactively increases capital gains taxes. It restructures government bonds, forcing losses on bondholders. It seizes or heavily taxes business assets. All of this is done legally through emergency decrees and legislative action. Emergency property taxes are introduced on real estate owners. These taxes are assessed at government valuations, not market values. They're applied retroactively, meaning people owe back taxes immediately. Properties that can't be sold are taxed at values nobody agreed with. Non-payment results in tax liens and eventual property seizure. Pension systems are partially seized or reformed. Pension contributions that workers made over decades are converted to government debt or reduced. Promised benefits are cut. Workers discover their retirement savings were neither private nor protected. Insurance products are devalued or forced into conversion. Life insurance policies are paid out in worthless currency. Annuities are converted to government debt. Insurance that was supposed to protect is rendered useless. Bank deposits are forced into local currency at artificial rates. Deposits that were in foreign are converted to local currency at rates the government sets, not market rates. A person with $100,000 sees it converted to local currency worth a fraction of its value. Wealth taxes are introduced targeting remaining assets. Capital gains taxes are retroactively increased, taxing profits from past years. Government bonds are defaulted or restructured, forcing losses on bondholders. Business assets are seized or heavily taxed until businesses close. Historical examples show this pattern repeats. In Argentina in 2001, the pension system was partially seized and converted to government debt. Property taxes increased dramatically. Vacation homes were subject to new levies. Tax liens were placed on properties. Many owners never recovered title because taxes accumulated faster than they could pay. In Germany in 1923, the government seized gold holdings through executive order. Emergency property levies were imposed. Businesses were nationalized. Protected assets were systematically taken and never restored. In Greece in 2015, emergency property levies were imposed on property owners. The pension system was reformed with benefits cut 40 to 60%. Insurance products were devalued. Emergency taxes targeted various assets. The middle class was destroyed while the wealthy who had fled in Stage 5 escaped. In Venezuela, the pension system was raided multiple times. Private retirement accounts were nationalized. Promised benefits never materialized. Workers discovered their lifetime contributions were appropriated by government. In Lebanon, bank deposits were forced into pound conversion at artificial rates. Depositors lost 90% of purchasing power through forced conversion. The government called this a temporary measure. It remained permanent. Current indicators show Stage 6 frameworks are being built legally. Discussions of wealth taxes are occurring in multiple countries. Pension reform proposals are being introduced involving reduced benefits. Emergency spending is increasing in crisis moments, signaling desperation. Asset seizure frameworks are being built into law through emergency powers. Digital asset tracking systems are being implemented globally. Real estate registries are being digitized, making property easier to tax and seize. Tax enforcement capabilities are increasing through technology and international cooperation. Why this stage matters is that it destroys the middle class. The middle class has visible, registered assets to seize. Real estate is registered. Bank accounts are tracked. Pensions are registered. The wealthy escaped in Stage 5 with their capital. The poor have nothing to seize because they were already outside the formal system. The middle class is trapped in the middle. They have assets but can't flee. They have wealth but can't protect it. The government seizes what remains. The government raises enough to delay but not prevent collapse. Stage 6 buys government time. The spending continues temporarily. The government maintains basic operations. But Stage 6 can't stop the inevitable. Stage 7 is when everything breaks. Stage 7 is when the system collapses completely. Currency is worthless. Supply chains are broken. Government can't function. Survival becomes local and informal. The mechanism of Stage 7 is complete system failure. By Stage 7, the government has seized remaining assets but still can't balance operations. Currency printing has continued to the point where money is functionally worthless. Nobody wants to accept the currency. Store shelves become empty because merchants won't trade goods for worthless currency. Supply chains break because international trade requires foreign currency and the country has none. Imports become impossible. Food becomes scarce. Fuel becomes scarce. The government can't pay employees because government revenues are zero. Employment disappears as businesses close and government stops functioning. The government loses ability to enforce laws because it can't pay police or military. Informal economies emerge as people resort to barter and direct exchange. Barter systems replace currency. Community becomes the survival unit. Historical examples show this pattern repeats. In Venezuela, food shortages became severe by 2017. The currency, the bolivar, became functionally worthless. People were emigrating by the millions. By 2023, most commercial transactions were in dollars because the bolivar was worthless. In Zimbabwe, hyperinflation reached 79 billion % monthly by November 2008. The currency was abandoned entirely. People began using US dollars for transactions. The government officially adopted the dollar as currency. In Argentina, currency devaluation cascaded after 2001. Food riots occurred as food became scarce. Barter networks emerged as people traded goods directly. The unemployment rate exceeded 50%. In Lebanon, the currency collapsed starting in 2019. The pound lost 90% of its value. Informal economies emerged as people attempted to survive without access to frozen bank deposits. In Germany in 1923, the currency became worthless. People used barter systems. A wheelbarrow of currency couldn't buy a loaf of bread. People reverted to direct exchange of goods and services. Current indicators show stage 7 risks are increasing. Supply chain vulnerabilities are increasing globally. Currency printing is accelerating. Social unrest is increasing as purchasing power declines. Government authority is weakening in some regions. Informal economies are growing. Barter systems are emerging in some communities. Local currencies are being created in some regions. Community networks are strengthening as people prepare for potential system failures. What stage 7 means is that survival depends on local resources. If you can grow food, you eat. If you have skills, you can trade them. If you have community networks, you can participate in barter. If you have tools, you can work. Skills become currency. Community becomes infrastructure. Those positioned with local resources, skills, and community networks survive. Those unprepared face devastation. Recovery takes years or decades. Economies that collapse into stage 7 take a generation to recover. This is the 7-stage cycle, and it's repeating in multiple economies simultaneously right now. Different economies are at different stages of this cycle. Some are in stage 3, some are in stage 4, some are in stage 5, and some are approaching stage 6. The United States is in stages 2 to 3. Unsustainable debt has accumulated. Growth limits are being reached. Interest payments are exceeding defense budgets. GDP growth is slowing despite stimulus. Stage 4 indicators are present. Inflation at 30-year highs. Central banks printing record currency. Real interest rates negative. Stage 5 indicators are beginning. Wealthy moving assets internationally. Capital flight accelerating. Foreign property purchases increasing. Brain drain beginning. Europe shows stages 3 to 4. Italy and Greece are showing stress. Government debt is at critical levels. Growth is stagnating. Stage 4 indicators are present. Inflation, negative interest rates, currency depreciation against dollar. Stage 5 indicators are present. Capital movements toward Germany and Switzerland. Wealthy relocating to stable countries, brain drain from vulnerable economies. Emerging markets show advanced stages. Venezuela is in stages 6 to 7. Asset seizure has occurred. System breakdown is advanced. Food is scarce. Currency is worthless. Mass emigration is ongoing. Lebanon is in stages 5 to 6. Capital controls are in place. Asset seizure through forced conversion has occurred. Banking system has effectively frozen. Turkey is in stages 4 to 5. Currency devaluation is accelerating. Capital flight is occurring. Inflation exceeds 50% annually. The point is that the global system is stressed simultaneously. Different economies are at different stages. The pattern is predictable. Recognition enables positioning. The framework is straightforward. Which stage is your economy in? Which stage is approaching? What preparation is needed for the next stage? How long do you have before transition? The 7-stage collapse cycle isn't new. It's repeated throughout history. And it's repeating right now. The question isn't whether collapse will occur somewhere. It's already occurring somewhere. The question is whether you'll recognize the stage your economy is in and position accordingly before the next stage arrives.